Welcome back, Focus Learners. Today, we are jumping right into a truly fascinating explainer. We're going to unpack a specific ancient financial framework and map it directly onto our very modern wallets. If you've ever felt completely overwhelmed by budgeting, or if you're just wondering if there's a deeper, more structured way to handle your finances, you are absolutely in the right place. We're exploring a faith-based framework that literally flips how you look at the money sitting in your bank account right now.
To do this, we're breaking down a specific source. This sermon is preached by Pastor Noel Sandesh at the Crown of Life Ministries, Bhopal. This sermon gives a strictly biblical perspective about spending, according to the Bible. We're going to impartially translate his theological points into a highly structured, super practical financial perspective. It's a really fascinating lens, driven entirely by biblical texts, but intensely applicable to your everyday spending.
But hey, before we get into the actual numbers, we have to establish the foundational premise of this whole framework. It requires a massive mindset shift about ownership. The sermon argues that believers aren't actually the owners of their money. Instead, they're defined as stewards or managers. Basically, a steward is someone entrusted to manage resources that ultimately belong to someone else, which in this context is God. So the big takeaway here? Every financial decision isn't about spending your money. It's about managing someone else's resources exactly according to their rules.
Okay, let's dive into the structure. We'll be looking at 1. The stewardship mindset. 2. Prioritizing family needs. 3. Enjoying God's blessings. 4. Wisdom regarding debt. And 5. Cultivating true contentment.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the stewardship mindset, managing God's resources.
The source points straight to Psalm 24:1, which teaches that absolutely everything ultimately belongs to God. Now, what does that mean? Practically? Well, it means honoring God first. The sermon points out that once the first fruits, or the tithe, is paid, your financial responsibilities don't just magically disappear. A lot of folks might think, okay, I gave my share, the rest is mine for whatever I want. But this framework argues the exact opposite. Every bit of that remaining income still has to be managed with deep biblical wisdom.
Which brings us right to Section 2, prioritizing family needs. Focusing on needs. Once that initial stewardship obligation is out of the way, what's next? The source uses 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8 to answer this. And man, the language here is incredibly strong. It states that if anyone doesn't provide for their relatives, especially their own household, they've denied the faith and are actually worse than an unbeliever. That is a strict biblical obligation right there. God expects believers to work hard to provide food, shelter, clothing, and care for their family. It's totally non-negotiable.
And this draws a really hard line between our needs and our desires. According to the sermon, before you even dream of putting money aside for a luxury vacation or a fancy new hobby, your budget has to lock down the essentials. We're talking rent or mortgage, groceries, keeping the lights on, and essential medical care. The framework demands that these absolute basics are secured first, no exceptions.
Moving on to Section 3, enjoying God's blessings, fulfilling desires.
So once those essentials are covered, the tone kind of shifts from strict obligations to permissions. There's this super common misconception out there that spending money on yourself is somehow unspiritual, right? But the sermon uses 1 Timothy 6:17 to clear this up. It says, God richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. The core principle is that God is viewed as a generous father. He actually delights in his children enjoying good things, as long as those things don't turn into idols that replace him.
But hold on, that enjoyment does come with a few strings attached. The framework outlines that you're fully permitted to spend on those desires, like a fun family vacation, the newest electronics, or a nice dinner out, but only if you've checked 4 specific boxes first. You've got to have paid your tithe, fully met your family's needs, avoided bad debt, and saved up for the future. Once those responsibilities are handled, enjoying the fruits of your labor is considered 100% biblical.
Let's shift gears to Section 4, wisdom regarding debt, avoiding bondage.
You probably caught that bit about avoiding bad debt just a second ago. Well, the sermon points to Proverbs 22:7, which warns that the borrower is slave to the lender. Now, it's worth noting that this biblical framework doesn't explicitly label all debt as a sin, but it does constantly warn against it. Why? Because using borrowed money to fulfill your wants is a fast track to financial slavery and major stress. Debt ties your hands. It limits your freedom to manage your money well, which really compromises your role as a good steward.
So how do we avoid this trap? The sermon breaks it down into some very practical steps. First off, if you want something big like a car, the best wisdom is to just save up and buy it in cash. If you absolutely have to borrow, step 2 is making sure those payments fit really comfortably into your existing budget. Step 3, strictly avoid high-interest loans that trap you in that endless paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. And step 4, the anchor for all of this, is maintaining a monthly budget. You've simply got to live within your means.
And speaking of budgets, the sermon brings up Luke 14:28 to show that budgeting isn't some new age accounting trick. It's actually ancient wisdom. The verse asks, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? The source uses this to prove that calculating your costs with a budget is a fundamental biblical expectation for managing any sort of resources.
All right, on to our final pillar, Section 5, Cultivating True Contentment, Overcoming Greed. You could have the most perfect budget in the world, but if your internal mindset is flawed, the whole framework falls apart. The sermon references Hebrews 13:5, which commands believers to keep their lives free from the love of money and just be content with what they have. The source points out that the absolute biggest danger in this entire financial framework is our human tendency to always want more, more, more. Spending on your desires suddenly crosses the line into sin the moment it's driven by greed, jealousy, or just wanting to impress other people. The sermon gives this awesome, modern example to highlight the tension. Contentment looks like keeping your perfectly functional smartphone or laptop. It does everything you need it to do, right? Greed, on the other hand, is rushing out to buy the newest model just to keep up with social trends or because of FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's a brilliant way to show exactly how this ancient call for contentment applies directly to the crazy consumer pressures we're all dealing with today. Which brings us to our final thought. We've unpacked a highly structured framework today, from realizing you're a manager, not an owner, to prioritizing family, responsibly enjoying blessings, dodging the slavery of debt, and really fighting for contentment. So, taking all this source material into account, I want to leave you with a provocative question. Are you actively managing your money according to your principles, or are your desires and your money managing you? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, Focus Learners, and I will catch you in the next one.